Hello, everyone. I'm here today, Nayaswami Asha, talking to Zachary. Hello, Zachary.
Hi, Asha.
And Zachary is speaking to us from Camino Island up in the Pacific Northwest, where they have a farm for Ananda Farm. What do you actually call that farm there?
Ananda Farm.
Ananda Farm. Okay, that's a good name for it.
Sometimes people call it Amanda Farm, but
They don't do that on purpose. Well, they don't do that accurately.
no.
So, Zachary, tell us a little bit about who you were before you came to Master. What you were like as a child. Were you thoughtful? Were you active? What was your upbringing like?
I grew up in Missouri, and actually St. Louis, Missouri.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like in a lot of ways, I had the best of both worlds in that I grew up in St. Louis with my parents, but all my family and my parents are from the same small town in the Ozarks. So I kind of got to experience both the urban life on one hand where I lived, but then all my breaks every summer, every winter was in the Ozarks. So I got this really balanced perspective of urban life and rural life.
Well, tell me what the Ozarks are. I mean, to me, forgive me, I conjure up a hillbilly image. Is that correct or not?
That's absolutely correct.
So,
but you know, in a lot of ways, it's really God's country. It's the nature there is so abundant with life. I don't even know anywhere that can quite compare to it in terms of the abundance. And one thing that comes to mind is just that there's actual rivers of spring water pouring out of the ground. So these springs are the biggest waterways in the whole world of natural spring water. Just in the middle of the Ozarks, just here and there, you just drive up on them and there they are. So just those kind of things.
So were your parents the first generation to leave the Ozarks for the big city?
Yeah, from their families, they were, yeah. So
how did they why did they make such a shift?
I think in both of their families, they were kind of the more radical siblings in the family. So my uncle Bruce would call them the city slickers. So they were always kind of leaving, and even when they were kids, they were headed out and going to the other towns and going to see the Beatles when the Beatles came through and that kind of stuff. So they were the explorers for sure. Yeah.
So did your parents, I mean, compared to their Ozarkian upbringing, they were radical. Were they radical in the context of St. Louis or not?
Yeah, I would say even there they have their scene and they're just pretty radical people. So they're still good. My dad's always been an artist. And then in the last 10 years or so, he took up gardening. And if you can imagine some incredible art garden fusion that's just full of thousands of flowers, that's what his yard looks like now. So I got exposed to a lot of interesting things through my parents from a young age.
So how would you describe yourself as a child? What were your interests?
I liked sports. My favorite thing to do was to be in the country. I can remember I would go be with my family for 2 months in the Ozarks from the time I was 3. And then when I would come back, I would come back and talk like a hillbilly and I had no idea. And my friends would say, "Why are you talking like that?" And I was, 5, 6 years old and had no clue that I was even talking country. But I absolutely loved being outside from as long as I can remember and being on the farms and in the woods and at the river. So I think I had an affinity for nature for as long as I can remember.
Did you have any kind of a religious upbringing?
In that sense too, it was really balanced. My dad was a professed atheist. My mom was always spiritual and actually always had this energetic power to blow things up. So she would flip light switches and always was blowing the lights in the house. And
wait, you're saying that rather casually. My mother had the energetic power to blow things up, like houses and cars, or
like microwaves and televisions. And for as long as I can remember, she could always just touch things, and some kind of energy would come through her that would explode things. So
that sounds like an expensive quality somehow.
It was strange, but it was actually normal in our household. We were just not surprised at all anymore. And then all my family in the Ozarks themselves were evangelical. So I got exposed to Jesus through, evangelical Ozark relatives, and I had a mixed bag with that. And I felt like I did actually get to know Jesus when I was young, until I was about 12, when I just revolted against the whole Christianity of the Bible Belt.
So when you say you got to know Jesus, do you feel like you got to know Jesus in your heart, or you just got to know what everybody thinks about Jesus?
I felt like when I look back on it, I realized the presence of Jesus, and I have memories of being in the church and singing the Gospels and being in tears, and experiences along those lines that were not really explicable to me as a child, but where I actually knew there was a tangible presence.
Huh. How interesting. So what happened to you when you were 12?
My cousin, I was the little cousin, so they were always, my two cousins I hung out with the most were 7 years older than me.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember a conversation where my cousin said, well, if you don't take Jesus for your savior, you can't be saved, and you go to hell. And that was about all I needed to hear. And I remember specifically saying, but what about the people in the other parts of the world that have never heard of Jesus? Is that fair that they would go to hell? Do you think Jesus would do that to them? And she said, Jesus will save you if you want to be saved. So there's really no excuse. Mm-hmm. And that was basically the end of my interest in going to the church with them when I was 12, maybe 13.
Did you feel bereft when you lost the church, or did it matter to you?
I wasn't identified with it personally, because I had a dad who was atheist, and he was also had virtues and good qualities. So I knew that there was not some absolute doctrine about being good and having to believe in some institution. So it was easy for me, actually, but it was harder for them, that I just lost all interest in going to church with them. And
well, because you also are going to be damned to hell, and that's kind of a bad fate for a little.
That I think for a lot of them, when I moved to California, I was definitely damned to hell for the rest of my life. So, yeah. But
so what did you do then? So now you're 12, and you're no longer worried about Jesus. So what happened in your life then?
I'd say from that point, I kind of went through transition years where I more or less had a normal adolescence. I played sports, I hung out with friends, and I didn't have any kind of clear focus or direction. And I think that went on through college and through university, where I was doing things, but not out of inspiration anymore. And
did you were you unhappy? Did that make you uneasy that you were just going through the motions like that?
Yeah, I think in a subtle way. I don't know. I wasn't aware of it like many people. I think I thought things were normal, and I had my creative outlets and things that I would do. Like, but I just loved to play basketball, actually. So even when I stopped playing competitively, I just would still play every day almost. And so I had things that I could do that would just free me still. And I knew that was missing something. So that started to take the form of traveling at some point, where I just wanted to live in different cities and experience life that way.
I'm going to back up for just a second. I've had many men that I've talked to in this talk to me about how much they love sports. You're just telling me that every day playing basketball was enough to sort of give your life. So clue me into this. What's so great about playing basketball?
Oh man, that's a good question. Okay, well, what I actually loved the most was playing 3-on-3, which is half court. I did not imagine talking about this right now, but there was a team element to it that was so much fun. And I had a few friends that we got really good playing together as a team. And there's a specific style called the pick and roll. And we became convinced that we could beat almost anyone, no matter how much better, bigger, and faster they were than us, using this strategy. So we tested that almost everywhere. When we were in high school, we would sneak into the Washington University gymnasium and play the college kids just to see if we could beat them that way. And most of the time we did. And but it was just so much fun to have this, like, to really try to master something. And in a fun way. It wasn't like we were trying to win a state championship at that point. It was just totally for fun. So, and I think getting the energy going was a huge part of it, just being in a flow with life and feeling uplifted. So
Okay, well,
Yeah.
that was a very good explanation. Thank you.
You
So,
know, I haven't thought about that in at least 10 years. So who
well,
knows?
you're by no means the first person who said to me, so I played sports, so I played, like this. And they say it to me as if I know what it means. And it finally occurred to me, I have no idea what it means. Never being inclined to tell that way myself. But
Interesting. Yeah.
so then you began to think about traveling became your interest. So we go through life just taking it as it comes. It seems normal. Our creative and happy outlet is basketball. So then why did you suddenly need something more than basketball?
Well, you know, I went to school, University of Missouri, and got a degree in finance. And
Finance.
school always came relatively natural to me in the sense that I didn't really ever have to focus very hard to, you know, be a straight A student and just get through it. But it also it never held me. So I never felt really like school was my home either. I never felt any direction there.
Right.
So then I knew that if I made money, I would be able to figure the rest out, or at least that's what I told myself. So I got a degree in finance, and from that point, I started moving around and was able to just get jobs in different cities and kind of experience life by traveling and having money, essentially.
So in the U.S., did you travel? Did you travel outside the U.S.?
The first place we went to was, the first place I went to was Dublin, Ireland.
Oh, so you stretched your wings right away.
Yeah, I was ready. You know, I had grown up in Missouri and went to school in Missouri, and I knew that there was a world out there that I didn't know about yet.
So what was your first experience? How did it feel for you to be in an English-speaking country, but Ireland is not the Ozarks?
you know, I loved the countryside, but Dublin itself didn't really enable me to change very much. It was the city culture of it still. I was more or less doing the same things. I was going out at night and, you know, going to happy hours and that kind of, but when I got out to the countryside, I could feel definitely a difference, just in terms of something awakening.
Awakening,
And,
something awakening in you?
Yeah.
Because it was Ireland and it wasn't the Ozarks? Or why would it awaken you differently?
I think more than anything, just connecting back to that source in nature again. That there's this source of life that isn't really predicated on human culture and social happiness and economic happiness and all the kind of things of the world that we think are gonna make everything okay. And
do you think do you think that like the nature spirits in Ireland are different than nature spirits in the Ozark? Were you actually meeting new consciousness there, or was it just nature itself again?
you know, I think for me, it's just the one nature, and that's just the same spirit that is all pervasive. So I never really have differentiated it in that sense.
Okay, so from Dublin, what did you do? So now you're getting back more connected with yourself, but do you continue in the same career for a while?
Yeah, I was able to get a job in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and was there for maybe 6 months to a year. And then with the same company, was able to transfer to San Francisco.
So
and then I worked
California.
California, yeah. And I felt like really that was when things started to change.
I see.
San Francisco was so expansive to my consciousness. The food, the diversity of people, just the culture was so much different than anything I had experienced anywhere else that it was exciting.
So how old were you and what year was this?
I was probably 23, 22, 23. Yeah. And whatever that year would be.
Well, I don't know because I don't know when you were born.
Yeah.
I was actually wondering what was going on in San Francisco at that time. So
it was about probably 2010, 2009,
2000.
something like that.
So in any of this, your connection is with nature. Does it occur to you that God has any part of this?
No, not at that point. You know, I really was not thinking about God at this point in my life at all.
Do you feel like any of the experiences you had in nature were actually an experience of God, even if you didn't call it that?
Absolutely. Yeah. And it really kind of ratcheted up when I when I was about 24, after about 2 years in corporate finance, I had what I have always thought of as a quarter life crisis.
Mm-hmm.
And I just knew I couldn't go on playing this by these rules anymore. And I needed to try something else. And I didn't know what that was, but I knew everything had to change. And so I quit my job. I remember calling my mom and telling her, Mom, I think I just have to stop. I don't know what I'm going to do, but I can't do it anymore. And she could hear in my voice that I was serious, that I just needed to not do it. And it was for me like putting my faith in the universe again, that something new, something would happen. It would be fine. Mm-hmm. And I would have to just put out energy and make it work. And I knew that. And from that place, strangely enough, I moved to Los Angeles of all places. And
that is
things
strange.
really took off there, actually.
What did you do in Los Angeles?
A little bit of everything. That was part of what was so exciting, was I had no expectations. I had no real personal aspirations for what to do. Mm-hmm. So I just started trying things. The first thing I did was I got jobs in production. Mm-hmm. So I just became basically a PA for commercial shoots. Uh-huh. And I would just get to work like a week or two, really long days, like 18-hour days, and then get paid a big check at the end. And then I could take another month off and do whatever I wanted. And it just gave me the freedom to breathe again and to really start asking, really not God yet, but asking kind of the universe and my inner self, what do I want from life, and what is really going to make me happy? And so when I started to have that space, things started to change and opportunities started coming. And so I worked in restaurants down there. I did testing. I was a test administrator. I just was doing anything and just trying it all. And it was really fun, actually, because I was free to do that.
And at what point did God come into it? And at what point did Yogananda come into it?
Great question. Yeah. Well, Haley came into it first. And she was my buddy in San Francisco, and we had been friends for about a year, 2 years maybe in San Francisco, just really good friends. Mm-hmm. And when I quit my job, she also had just graduated from University of San Francisco. So we spent about 2 months in San Francisco just without jobs, riding our bikes around the city. And when she came to LA, she brought with her Autobiography of a Yogi.
I see.
And started exposing, and the other book was Out of the Labyrinth. But
Tommy's book. Yeah,
exactly. And that really, I have to say, spoke to me at the time immensely.
I have to pause for a second. Swami Kriyananda loved that book, and so few people appreciate it. So I know from wherever he is in the cosmos, he's extremely happy to hear that Out of the Labyrinth was really important to you. Yeah. It's a philosophical explanation of why life has meaning, correct? Mm-hmm. Tell me why it spoke to you.
Well, that's exactly what I needed at the time, because I was very much in my head and trying to figure things out. Uh-huh. And so to have just somebody walk me through the steps of consciousness, so I could understand that there really was more to life. I knew inside of myself on a level, but the world was not telling me there was. To have somebody who could just take me through a logical progression was extremely important, and it just made so much sense that I finished that book and then I read it again right after, just so I could make sure I understood the progression well enough. And from that point, I've never really needed to really approach life from a philosophical place at all again. So it really released me in a lot of ways.
That's fantastic. So then, did you read Autobiography at the same time or afterwards, or how did it work?
This all corresponded to us leaving Los Angeles probably every other weekend to go camping. And so we would go to Los Padres and to Malibu and eventually to the Sierras. And when we went to the Sierras, something happened inside of us that just said, you're actually supposed to stay and you're not supposed to go back to Los Angeles, which was really radical, because one of my best friends from Missouri was moving out to move in the apartment with us, and everything was so lined up for fun in Los Angeles. But this feeling in the mountains was so tangible that actually said, you're supposed to live here. And so within a week, the way Master works, we had gone back to LA and purchased a trailer that we got offered jobs by the Forest Service while we were backpacking. I mean, I don't know how many people that happens to, but it was interesting. And we went back to LA. We needed a trailer. So we got a trailer from what I later found out to be the base of Mount Washington for $450, about 1/3 of our month's rent. And we were off within a week, and we ended up spending the next two, spring, summer, fall seasons in the high country of the Sierras, where our life really changed.
So you mentioned that autobiography of a yogi was there. Had you become committed to master? Did you accept that book when you read it? How did that go?
That was really, the mountains started working on us, and we had autobiography and Out of the Labyrinth with us. And it was really from that point that I would say we were aware of Divine Mother. And that was what we would often say, because we knew we weren't really making the choices anymore. It was clear that something was taking us places and introducing us to people. And we had teachers in the mountains. And one of them is still one of our great teachers to this day. And it was just clear that Divine Mother was now in charge. And so, but I knew that consciousness of Divine Mother and this awareness came directly from autobiography and from master. And it just became so normal that we would just say, well, I think this is what Divine Mother wants. But at the time we still had very little association with Ananda specifically. It was all just through the books and through Haley's mom, who was a part of Ananda in Washington.
I see. So how did you end up then at Ananda? You came out of the mountains, so we'll skip a little bit. So how did you end up, and where did you go? Where did you start with Ananda, and why?
Yeah. So, towards the end of the second year in the mountains, we basically were feeling like we actually had to leave, which was, I would say, gut-wrenching. It was the hardest thing. The hardest single choice I've ever had to make was to leave the mountains. But we knew we were being called to leave. And when we left, Haley had been signed up to take yoga teacher training at Ananda Village. And simultaneously, we had made friends with a farmer in the mountains. So we were living on a farm in the foothills. And then she took the month-long program at the village. And so I would visit her on the weekends during that. And that was my first my first personal exposure was through the village and through visiting.
What did it feel like to you when you went to the village?
At that point, I loved nature, and I was still very skeptical about people. And so that first weekend I went, and I pretty much questioned everything. And I wasn't totally ready to believe it, but I wasn't writing it off. I just wanted to make sure that it was actually real. And so I went and I experienced it the first weekend, and I had a lot of questions. And when I went back the next weekend, something started to change. I remember they let me just energize with them as part of their YTT. And I thought, okay, this is really interesting. And we did like the super fast energization set in 5 minutes. And I really liked it. And then Gyandev did a 3-hour Mahabharata,
right.
Not a reading, just a storytelling. And it went by in like 10 minutes. And gradually enough of these experiences add up. And I got to see an Ananta Sunday service that I started to think, this isn't just a fluke, that this isn't just some cult out in the forest, that this is actually real. And then as soon as I crossed that threshold in myself of realizing that these people were sincere, I knew I can't walk away from this now. Now that I've seen that this is here, I absolutely have to keep taking the steps that are put in front of me. And so it was never really, in a sense, something that was just totally obvious to me, but it's always been something that just step by step I take. And once I realized people were actually dedicating their life to it, it awoke something in me that I could do this too, and I should support this also.
And was Swami Kriyananda still living? What year was this?
Yeah, that was probably 2000 and, I'm so bad with years, but 11 maybe.
So
2011, 12.
Did you meet Swamiji that summer?
I think it was the next summer. that we came and met Swami during the Finding Happiness filming. And that was when I met you.
Yes, that's right.
And,
on the set, I was there.
And
So,
I had great memories of that actually still.
yes, me too. So what, did Swami Kriyananda make an impression on you?
Oh man. You know, it's a little unique in the sense that I think with Haley had written him a letter about Out of the Labyrinth. And so they had a very personal connection kind of right off the bat from that. But I didn't feel that in myself. And I think there was such a wave of energy around him at the time. And it was also new to me, and that I was not drawn personally in like that. And I kind of stood on the sideline and observed. And, you know, I had people like you come up and show me great kindness amidst that, when I was still really feeling out what is this place and why are people treating him like a king. And so it didn't really make sense to me still right here, but I was still willing to be there in my heart. And so there was nothing to speak of personally. And, you know, I've felt very much how that's still been our relationship in a lot of ways, where it's not very personal, but the truth and the consciousness that's there, you know, it feels so personal to me. And not in a personality kind of way, but in a it's inside of me kind of way. And
so skepticism has gone away. It's just you have your own way of relating. Would that be the way to say it?
I think so. And I think it's always just been, you know, for whatever reason, more just on a consciousness plane and not in an outward way.
Right. Well, that's the truth of it. So, you know, the body is very, very short-lived compared to the influence of the consciousness. You know, one little incarnation, but the life, the power of the life goes on.
Yeah.
Already his Out of the Labyrinth took you out of your mind and onto the path. So, I mean, that was his service to you regardless.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
And that book was a huge effort on his part with deep commitment. He was thinking of you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel that in your book too, you know, just how closely connected I feel to him through the thoughts and the feelings that he put out there for all of us, but not necessarily in a personal, you know, I know Swami kind of way, but in the universality of what he shared for everyone. It's like there's not much separation that I feel in that sense.
Well, that's perfect, because that's his self-definition. The other was so superficial, it didn't make any difference. Everybody has to have a personality, but it's the consciousness. So I'm going to have to wait to the end right now, because we only have a few more minutes. So how did you end up at Ananda Farm on Camino Island?
Well, you know, that was just another Divine Mother thing. We absolutely knew we were supposed to be farming, which, you know, I have a degree in finance and Haley's got a degree in philosophy. So I guess that made two farmers. Right. And the dominoes literally just fell all the way up to Washington, where we talked to Glenda, and that's Haley's mom. And she was a part of a group of about 20 investors who were trying to pool money to buy land to buy a farm. And so we came up here and we met Hriman and Padma and immediately had a great rapport with them. And, you know, it was just written, and everything has been a process. So when I say that it was written and it was Divine Mother thing, it's not to say that it came easy or there wasn't growth along the way. It's just to say that when I look at it, it was just also clearly the next step. And so we were able to help find the property on Camino with the group here, and we moved here in 2012.
2012, that long ago already, 8 years.
Yeah, this is the 8th year.
Amazing. Well, there's a great deal we could talk about farming, and maybe we will at another time, but I think this is the story that we can tell today. Great. Thank you, Zachary. That was exceedingly interesting.
Oh, good.
I had no idea. From finance to farmer is who you are.
Something like that.
Who would have thunk? What an interesting multitude of experiences, my friend. Well, God bless you, and God bless all the good work that you're doing.
Thanks, Asha.